Some 3 decades since the end of the Cold War, the world order is undergoing a structural transformation. At the heart of it is the challenge posed to the hegemony of the U.S. This is primarily being led by Russia and China, which are discontented with Washington's excesses across the global stage. The most recent example of this rebellion was the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The war was a proxy for a rebellion by Russia and the rest against the United States. The African continent is an obvious contender for major power courting as this realignment takes place. This is for at least 4 reasons. Firstly, it is the largest regional bloc in the United Nations, representing some 30% of all the votes in the General Assembly. Again, it possesses some crucial raw minerals that are found only in the continent. Also, it possesses some important sea trade routes, particularly in East Africa. Finally, the continent is home to the fastest-growing youth demographic and will account for about 42% of the world's youth by 2030. In 2022, the continent as a whole exported $43.1 billion worth of goods to the U.S. and imported goods worth $30.6 billion. By comparison, China exported $164.1 billion to Africa and imported $117.5 billion worth of African goods in the same year, with African exports totaling $661.4 billion. The U.S. accounts for 6.5% and China 17.7%. China, the notable growth story of the past half-century, has thus become the African continent's single biggest trading partner, though the combined power of the European Union's trading bloc of 27 countries still leads. China's ties with the continent are the result of decades of diplomatic and commercial efforts to woo the continent through the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. Part of this has been driven by its desire to counter the U.S. Russia has pursued a different strategy. Given that its trade with the continent is at a minimum, exports and imports were around $18 billion in 2021. It has rather sought to become a security partner, drawing on sentimentalized Soviet history. Some African states are more deeply intertwined with the U.S. than others. For example, Djibouti has an American military base, along with other states, though not Russia at this point. And Egypt, Nigeria, and South Africa are also among the top recipients of U.S. direct investment. On the other hand, Eritrea, which was the only African state to brazenly vote against the UN General Assembly to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, seems to have no aspirations to be in America's good graces. This notorious outlier aside, the world is deeply intertwined with high interdependence even among the competing major powers. Then there are the trade routes. The Red Sea route, which straddles northeast Africa and links it to the Indian Ocean, constitutes 10% of annual global trade. The Red Sea route passes countries such as Eritrea and Somalia. Both have been actively courted by Russia. The U.S. and China, despite their trade war, have struggled to decouple from one another, with their bilateral trade reaching new heights as recently as last year. In light of the comparatively diminished U.S.-Africa trade, the U.S. may be looking to make use of third parties. It could potentially influence the EU to influence Africa. The Huawei issue demonstrates this. The U.S. has successfully pressured quite a few of its allies to halt doing business with the Chinese technology giant. According to UNCTAD data, France and the UK are the principal holders of African assets. As these and other European states seek to de-risk from China, there may be third-party consequences for Africa. This might include undue pressure on the continent to behave in certain ways towards China and towards Russia. China is well ahead of the rest of the world in securing a fully vertical supply chain for electric vehicle production. But it is still hungry for metals such as copper and cobalt, of which China, the U.S., and Europe produce very little, while Africa dominates. Humanitarian aid to Africa has also increased since Biden took office, notably to countries battling food insecurity that became worse after the price of wheat and other exports from Ukraine and Russia skyrocketed during the war.